of 20 Willow Glen, representing the Willow Glen Condominium Association. I wish to speak about the risks of intensification of the use if the application were to be approved. The church has ambitions to grow. Why else would it spend 5.6 million on buying the building and another 3.5 proposed on alterations for a building 4 times the size of Dunwoody? At your previous meeting, you heard Mr. Bob Adams, who's here this evening, speak very expansively about how the building would be used 7 days a week and the way in which the public would be attracted to come into it. Please take a moment to look at the next slides. These are quotations from representatives of the church. The ambition to grow is clear. It's stated in the letter of intent. It's stated in the public pronouncements. If there are ever any doubts about the church's intentions at this site, they've been made clear in a press release on the official website. Please look at that slide. Training and council, the whole. This is no ordinary parish church. It's intended to be the centre of operations for the Deep South, with just 81 parking spaces, even less when the inevitable intersection improvement does take place. There's a number of other organisations who no doubt will be brought onto the site. It hasn't been denied that they would, and they will increase the traffic. Once a church use is established for this building, how would it be possible to control such an increase in use? If you approve, I suggest you'll be on a slippery slope, storing up zoning enforcement problems and problems for the neighbourhoods for the future. This is the time to take a stand against anything but the office use originally granted for this property. The alternative conditions are a desperate attempt to make up for a basic deficiency in parking. They've been impossible to police and enforce, and we hope we are not put in the position where in a year or two we're forced to say, we told you so. And may I just comment about the alternative conditions? Because I thought I heard Mr. Galloway imply that somehow the staff were endorsing his conditions. I don't see how that's possible, since the staff's recommendation is for 3 floors. Mr. Galloway has been adamant that his condition, the alternate conditions, are to be attached to 4 floors. So, as I see it, the staff has just put these conditions before you, and certainly I didn't read any endorsement in the staff's recommendation. The Church of Scientology purchased this building with its eyes open, and now, as I told you last time, it wants to try to put a quart into a pint pot. The next slide summarises the objections, but may I bring you back to the zoning ordinance, because that's what this matter is really all about, not whether this condition or that condition is preferable. You may perhaps have wondered why you've been asked to consider the application again. Certainly there are the new alternate conditions, but before you consider them or any other conditions, you need to judge the proposal against the ordinance. The staff report in effect asks you to use section 28 of the zoning ordinance to override the parking requirement for mixed uses and adopt a lower requirement. Section 28 was not mentioned until after the vote was taken at your last meeting. Paragraph 1 of section 28, not quoted in the staff report, does indeed give the City Council such a power, after consideration by the Planning Commission. But its use is limited to whenever the public necessity, convenience, general welfare or good zoning practice justify such action. We believe it is incumbent upon you to consider the wording of section 28 before recommending a departure from the ordinance and before consideration of what conditions should be attached to any approval. It's difficult to see by any stretch of the imagination how such justification exists here. This is not an appropriate case for conditional approval. There are no plans to show how 3 floors would be used. If 3 floors only were granted, you'd be writing a blank cheque. Where would the sanctuary go? Furthermore, by our estimation, using the information supplied by the applicant, even 3 floors plus a sanctuary on the first floor and retaining the basement parking would still require significantly more than the 111 spaces that would be available if the intent of the ordinance was properly applied. So, I mean, doesn't it speak for itself? But if you are minded to grant approval, we hope you won't, to recommend approval, we ask for inclusion of the community conditions which have been submitted by us. I'm not going to run through all of them. You do need to be reminded why many people, you don't need to be reminded why many people voted yes in the referendum in 2005 for greater control over zoning decisions and better protection for neighbourhoods. Fulton County went quite far enough in 1983, too far in the view of their own planning commission, which voted 7-0 for a denial, and too far in the views of their staff, who used expressions like posing a serious threat to the integrity of residential neighbourhoods along and off Glenridge Drive. What has changed?
Time.
Please leave things as they are. Thank you very much, Chairman.
That's the end of our 20 minutes. We have 2 more standing in line. I've been here for a while. Give me an idea what kind of timeline you might need. 2 minutes, and behind you?
About 1 minute or less.
You want to get 4 more minutes on the board, folks, or how you want to handle it? 3 minutes? You making a motion, Al?
Yeah.
Motion. Second. In favor? Okay. We're going to add 3 minutes to each side.
My name is Sheila O'Shea. I am a resident of Round Hill Condominiums at 5400 Roswell Road, across the street from the property in question. This matter has been deferred twice, in which each deferral it becomes clearer that any compromise between the needs of the petitioner and the needs of the neighborhood is physically impossible. The number of concessions that would need to be made for the building to be suitable for the petitioner's needs would be disastrous for the neighborhood. In turn, the number of restrictions to make the building suitable for the neighborhood would render the building useless for the petitioner's intended purposes. Any points between the two would only leave the building being slightly less disastrous for the neighborhood and slightly less useless for the petitioner. If indeed the building cannot be put to use by the petitioner without all 4 floors, then perhaps the petitioner's $5 million would have been better spent on a building that already had the space they needed. As I have stated repeatedly, the City of Sandy Springs is under no obligation to suffer the consequences of the petitioner's mistake in judgment. This building is an office building, and indeed only just barely works as an office building with a number of variances grandfathered in. Were this building being built now, it would not make it past the blueprint stages before the Planning Commission would insist on changes to bring it in line with the current needs of the neighborhood. We should be no less firm in asserting those needs because the building already exists. The requested use is entirely too intense for the location. Placing restrictions will only burden the city with the enforcement of those restrictions. The best answer is to deny the petition outright. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Manuel L. Curry. I've lived in Sandy Springs for over 30 years, and I now live at 60 Willow Glen. And I'd just like to point out an egress issue that's a public safety issue. The applicant said this was primarily a parking issue, but I don't think that's really correct. If you can visualize how you go into this site, either from Glen Ridge or from Roswell Road, you turn into the site, you have to stop if you turn into the site on the post office side, because you have to make a left turn into their parking, and you have to be sure nothing's coming in your direction to prevent you from making a left turn. If you turn in from the Roswell side, you turn into a T. So again, you have to stop and make sure you can go either right or left. Now, 10% of the 283 people that are allowed show up at the same time. You're going to have 27 cars on Glenridge Drive waiting to get in, or 27 cars on Roswell Road waiting to get in. So this is a big public safety issue that's just going to get worse and worse as this congregation grows, and we ask you to deny this petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Galloway, I lost track of how much time you got left, but I think you've got enough to go with. Don't use it all, please.